It's Shabam, sponsored in part by Google.
So, in the last episode, Nadine, Owen, and Elliot made it to the Vandenberg Air Force Base, but not to safety.
What is that?
Whoa!
Standing between them and the actual base was a field of dead and dying zombies.
Of course, a field of Zinskis.
After some ingenious problem solving, the kids managed to signal the base using the only bit of Morse code you'll ever need.
Dot, 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 dash, dash, dash.
Look!
It worked!
No way!
Okay, look human, everybody.
And they got picked up by a helicopter and guys in hazmat suits.
Stay where you are.
Those are those airtight, full-body, astronaut-looking suits that epidemiologists wear.
We will come to you.
And they got flown back to the base.
And here's where we begin this episode. After going through a formal intake process and getting some food and water, the kids got the opportunity to sit around and wait some more.
How much longer are we going to be in here?
4 more hours. Mandatory 5-hour quarantine for anyone who is brought onto the base from the outside.
Remember, quarantine is where you put people that look healthy but might have been exposed to a pathogen. They stay in quarantine long enough to see if they begin to show signs of infection at a later time.
Ridiculous! We just rode like 1,000 miles on our bikes to get here. We are obviously not infected.
Now, we know Nadine's not lying. We also know that they're probably not infected because we've been with the kids the whole time and have seen, or rather heard, that they didn't get bitten or have any direct contact with a Zinski.
But from the military's perspective, they just picked up 3 kids from a field full of Zinskis who say they've been on their own for over a month. From their point of view, there's a high probability that these kids are infected.
Letting an infected person into a tightly packed population of healthy people could be fatal for everyone. So it's critical that they follow a process to find out the truth.
And that's precisely what this final episode is about. We're going to end the season right where we began, with the truth.
The truth.
In the first episode, we talked about why you need to think scientifically to avoid brain traps, so you stay focused on the truth. In this episode, we're looking at how you actually do that.
What about Mom and Dad?
Yeah, what about our parents? Have you found them yet? We're
The
looking
kids
for Gina,
are also trying to find out the truth.
Walker,
What happened to their
Miles
parents?
Prescott.
We're still looking. If your parents are here, we'll find them. Don't worry.
I wish people would stop saying that.
It'll be okay, Nadine.
How do you know, Owen?
Hey guys, question. Would you rather stay in quarantine for 12 more hours or use a straw to drink milk up your nose?
I'd rather know where my dad is.
Right now, the status of the kids' parents is an unknown.
Hey, we made it this far.
Obviously, this is stressful, though Elliot seems to be coping better than the others.
We're alive, don't forget that.
But Nadine's reaction to not knowing what's going on is part of a deeper characteristic of our brains.
I'd rather know where my dad is.
Our brains are very uncomfortable not knowing stuff.
I want to know what's down there.
I want to know what's over there.
We don't like the dark because we don't know what's there.
I know how it ends.
We don't like unfinished stories because we don't know what happens in the end. Not knowing stuff can be really stressful, especially when it affects us personally. Like during natural disasters when there are so many things that we don't know. Like, will I have a place to stay? Do I have food? Do I have water? Are the people that I love safe? When unknowns affect us personally, our brains say,
I hate unknowns. I hate them so much, I just rather believe...
Brain traps!
and that's when we fall into brain traps and start making stuff up.
What we need to do is figure out a way to sort out these unknowns correctly so we get to the truth.
What we need is to think, say it with me,
Scientifically.
Scientifically.
Oh, wow. One more time.
Scientifically.
One more time.
Scientifically.
Useless. You guys are terrible.
Why are we incapable of saying things at the same time?
If you remember from episode 4, our communication systems allow information to spread all over the world incredibly fast, which is great because research about diseases can get from one country to another in seconds. This makes science and the knowledge that comes from it more accessible to more people.
But it also means that information that isn't true or misinformation can spread all over the place too. Like fake news stories, fake pictures and videos, hoaxes, people lying about who they are or what they've done, or what they know. And the fake stuff is meant to look like the real stuff, so you let it into your thinking. And that's when misinformation can spread to other people, kind of like a virus.
To protect ourselves from getting infected by this misinformation, we need a process that separates fact from fiction. Think about how the Vandenberg medical staff deal with new arrivals. To separate the healthy people from the infected people, and to protect from infection, they need to make sure that people aren't carrying viruses on the outside of their bodies or on the inside of their bodies. So the process they go through has 3 simple steps. Step 1, remove and throw away your clothes. Step 2, take a disinfecting shower that takes care of all the stuff on the outside. Step 3, wait in quarantine for 4 hours. If by the end of this process they haven't turned into a Zinski, then they're not infected. The base stays protected from infection because every time there's a new arrival, they go through the same steps. Clothes, shower, quarantine.
Think about your brain as a safe zone that you want to keep protected from infection. And every piece of information you get is like a new arrival, and you have to separate fact from fiction, no matter how real or crazy things sound.
The vampiric chupacabra, of course Loch Ness, various bat demons in Zanzibar.
That's Benjamin Radford.
Crystal skulls. I've occasionally referred to myself as a scientific paranormal investigator, a folklorist.
He spent a good part of his life scientifically investigating all sorts of unconventional claims, from weird animal sightings to medical mysteries.
Basically, I try to approach so-called unexplained or mysterious phenomena using a scientific process.
He investigates the truth behind weird unknowns. And this fascination started when he was a kid.
When I was a teenager, I was fascinated by the weird things in the world. So I would go to a local bookstore and I would plunk down, my allowance money, a couple bucks, and I would buy these used books on UFOs and Bermuda Triangle and monsters and weird things like that. But after a while, I realized that there wasn't any real investigation. I'm not seeing any research. I'm just seeing people repeating stories.
Ben realized that to actually figure out what's true and what's not, you have to change the way that you think about new information. So he became a skeptic and started doing the research himself. And you might be thinking, what's a skeptic?
A lot of times the public doesn't really know what a skeptic is. They think that a skeptic is a debunker or somebody who doubts everything.
I don't know about that.
And of course, that's not true. A skeptic is basically a person that asks for evidence. It's sort of a science-based approach to all sorts of claims.
Believe me.
Political claims, advertising claims, paranormal claims, science claims. Anytime someone wants you to believe something, you should ask,
believe me.
Why? Why should I believe that?
Believe me. Believe me. Believe me.
I believe you. So you've come across an article or a video, a commercial, a book, even a friend telling you something, or maybe a news report. How do you answer the question, why should I believe this?
Believe me.
Well, we have the solution. We're proposing a simple 3-step process that will help you figure out what's true and what's not, which will help you choose what to believe and what not to believe.
But before we take those steps, we have to change the way that we think. And to do that, we need a tool.
We're gonna bust out a thinking tool, which we call our
Mental Truth Probability Meter.
The probability meter works like this. Instead of thinking about the world in binary, where things are either true or not true, start thinking of things as being on a continuum, where really, really probable is on one end, and really, really not probable or improbable is on the other end.
It also means you have to stop using the word impossible.
But that's impossible to do.
A true scientist will never rule out something and say, that's impossible, that can't be true, because we don't know. We're still learning about the world.
Remember Tim, our neuroscientist from the last episode?
I'm a scientist, so nothing's impossible?
The closest he came to saying impossible was this.
It's a very, very low probability of occurring.
You can think like this too by switching on your probability meter. Now you may be thinking to yourself, that's great guys, but how do I actually use this in real life when I'm talking to my friends?
Well, you're basically creating a new habit. So when anyone tells you something like X,
instead of saying, is X possible? The question is X probable?
You're thinking in probabilities.
And this is how scientists think because it's useful for adjusting one's thinking based on new information. If new information comes up, the probability can shift either towards less likely or more likely.
Now you're thinking,
great, but show me an example. Bet you don't have an example.
There's actually a great example of this in episode 7. It's the Jamestown starving time story that our historian of American history, Joyce Chaplin, was talking about. If you remember, in the winter of 1609, the Jamestown colonists ran out of food and became so desperate that they had no choice but to
dig up dead corpses out of graves and to eat them.
Which is crazy, right? It's totally disgusting and sounds highly unlikely. Even to historians, it sounded unlikely. Here's Joyce Chaplin.
There were arguments among historians about whether we should believe this or not. Was this propaganda?
Propaganda is basically misinformation used to make people believe a certain point of view.
Or were these really true accounts of what went on?
Because up until now, all you had was some old documents that told the story. And then some new information came along. Archaeologists found the remains of a woman that had been dug up and partially eaten.
And there you are. The documentary record had said something, and science had indicated that that document trail was true.
Or more probably true.
Thinking in probabilities is also useful because
we don't like to think that we're wrong. We don't like to admit that we're wrong. We don't like to realize that we're wrong.
Which is, of course, silly, because realizing you're wrong is how we learn what's right. But it still feels bad. When using probabilities, it feels better to change your mind because instead of having to flip from one position to another,
True.
I believe it.
False.
I don't believe it.
You're just adjusting your probability, leaving it open for it to go back. So, thinking in probabilities helps you think like a scientist because it allows you to easily adjust for new information. And 2, it doesn't feel as bad when you change your mind.
Phew. Okay, before we do our steps, let's take a little break.
Hey, Gerald.
Hey, Alan.
I know something no one in the office knows.
Hold on. What's that?
Cheryl stole all the computers from the supply room.
Really? When?
Last week.
Why do you think she did it?
Who knows? Maybe she's gonna put them on eBay or something.
No, why do you think it was her who took them and not somebody else?
Well, 2 weeks ago, she stopped coming to work. Then last week, the computers disappeared.
Cheryl went on vacation to France 2 weeks ago. She's not in the country right now.
She probably faked her family vacation.
With her wife and kids?
They're probably in on it. The whole family
Bye,
has decided
Alan.
they're gonna work. Why are you walking away? Don't walk away. You know it's true.
Okay, we're back. Before the break, we talked about thinking in probabilities, so you can adjust your probability of truth based on new information. Now we're going to introduce a simple 3-step process to handle incoming information, so you can separate things that are probably true and probably not true.
The 3 steps to figuring out the truth about things.
And it goes like this. Step 1, analyze the source. Step 2, analyze the information. Step 3, triangulate. Now, what does that mean? Let's explore these steps in a little more detail.
Step 1. Analyze the source.
Who is the source?
Step 1 is to analyze the source. The first question to ask of any information you get is, where is this information coming from? In other words, who is the source of this information?
The credibility of a source determines the credibility of the information.
So what you want to figure out is, can I trust this source?
If you think about the most trustworthy person to get information from, that would be someone who A, is not lying, B, is not stuck in a brain trap, in other words, someone who thinks scientifically about the claims they are making, and C, someone who knows what they're talking about, meaning someone who knows lots of stuff about that thing you just heard. So, where does that leave us?
The most reliable source then is the premier expert,
This person knows everything there is to know about the subject you're interested in.
who is perfectly honest
Never told a lie.
and completely unbiased.
Completely objective in every single situation. Always.
And that doesn't exist. Because we're all human, and we all have biases.
A bias is when someone leans a certain way for a reason that has nothing to do with any particular claim. Think of it like a magnet that is constantly pulling on your probability meter, skewing the results.
So an honest, unbiased expert, they don't exist. But the closer you can get to that, the better the source is. And that should raise your probability meter.
It's not always easy to find this out, so here's a couple tips. 1, avoid liars. Well, liars probably not going to be honest. Okay. 2, be aware of your own bias. For example, let's say for some reason you think people with glasses and British accents are more trustworthy. You have a bias. So when you hear,
I'm not a doctor, but I've come up with the cure for the flu.
your probability meter should go down. But it doesn't because your bias magnet is pushing your probability meter up a little bit. And whenever you encounter a Brit with bad eyesight, your bias magnet is pushing up no matter what that person says. So pay attention to your own biases and be aware of them in other people. And 3, look for people who have put in the time to become experts. Because learning things takes time. And if they put in the time, they probably know what they're talking about.
The problem is that you can't really tell by looking at someone whether they've spent the time to learn stuff. So some good questions to keep in mind are:
do they have a PhD? Are they medical doctors? Are they recognized in the field? Have they passed exams? That doesn't guarantee that they're the best in the field. It doesn't guarantee that you might not get bad information from them, but it does suggest that they probably are much more likely to be a recognized expert and give good advice and information than the average person.
So the closer to an unbiased, honest expert your source is, the more your probability meter should go up.
Now, before we go to step 2, we're going to take a little break.
Gerald, man, how's it hanging?
Hey, Brian.
Boy, do I have some news for you, dude.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Okay, what's the news?
You know flesh-eating bacteria?
Yeah?
Yeah, well, it comes from Mars, man. They just proved it.
Okay, and this time, who's the source?
My brother's friend knows a guy who's an astronaut or something.
How do you know he's an astronaut?
That's what my brother said.
So you heard all this from your brother?
No, Scott's sister overheard him talking on the phone.
Bye, Brian.
No, it's true.
Bye.
Okay, so we've analyzed the source, seeing how close we can get to an unbiased, honest expert. Now it's time for
Step 2. Analyze the information.
The next step is to analyze the information itself. What is the source telling you? If someone is making a claim, they should present evidence to back up that claim. Otherwise, there's no reason to believe them.
The tricky thing is, there's all different types of evidence, and they're not all equally strong. So they shouldn't all pull on your probability meter the same amount. To make it easier, we've sifted these into 3 buckets, starting with the weakest, going to the strongest. And then we'll explain why. Okay, here they are. Anecdotal evidence, physical evidence, experimental evidence.
Okay, now explain the differences.
1, anecdotal evidence is someone's personal experience, so something that they heard or something that they saw. 2, physical evidence or stuff you can see or handle, like blood samples from infected people or a photograph or a video like the one Nadine and Elliot were watching when the outbreak was just starting.
Oh my God!
And lastly, there's 3, experimental evidence or the results of a test. An example would be the outcome of a medical trial or the results of a crash test. That's why information that comes from an experiment is called experimental evidence.
These names are so complicated.
Okay, but why are they ranked like this? Well, anecdotal evidence is called that because it relies on anecdotes.
An anecdote is a short story about somebody's personal experience.
So anecdotal evidence is basically stuff people say they experienced.
It's no wonder that this is the weakest form of evidence because it relies on people's brains. And your brain is the thing telling you what you're experiencing.
Believe me.
The truth behind what actually happened to somebody can be very different than what their brains think happened to them.
This is the big problem with anecdotal evidence. It relies on our brains, which, if we've learned anything from episode 1, are not always good at figuring out the truth. If this is the only evidence you have, just know that the brain is in there messing with how we experience reality.
That's not how I remember it.
So, stuff people told you they experienced, pretty weak evidence. It might nudge your probability meter a little, but for some big movement, we need stronger evidence. Next, physical evidence.
So actual samples or photographs, video, anything that other people can share and look at is stronger than one person's personal experience because now there is a record of that experience that other people can analyze for themselves.
The personal journal of George Percy talking about eating corpses is anecdotal evidence that the Jamestown colonists were desperate and starving back in 1609. But since he's been dead for over 400 years, we can't talk to George and find out if he's a liar or an exaggerator or a meticulous, honest note-taker. All we have are the words his brain came up with.
Nothing was spared to maintain life.
But the skeleton of an actual corpse that shows signs consistent with cutting up a dead body, that's physical evidence that doesn't rely on George's brain at all.
Physical evidence is pretty strong, but it still needs to be analyzed because it can be faked, which we'll get to in part 2. The strongest form of evidence is experimental evidence because you're showing the results of a test. So anybody can replicate it if they have the same materials.
For example, during an epidemic, doctors at the CDC would need to find out exactly how a virus is transmitted. Now, we know the Knox virus is not airborne and spread only through biting because we wrote it like that. But doctors would have to figure it out for themselves. They may have an idea that it's biting based on their personal experience, but they can't rely on anecdotal evidence because people's lives are at stake. They need the strongest possible evidence, and that's experimental evidence. So, how could you show it's not airborne with an experiment?
You could do it this way. Take 2 rats. One's infected and one's healthy. And first you separate them so that they can't bite each other, but they're breathing the same air. If the healthy rat stays healthy, then airborne spread is really unlikely. Now you do the experiment again. You let the zombie rat bite the healthy rat. If that healthy rat now turns into a zombie rat, you know that the virus is spread by biting.
And here's why this form of evidence is so strong. If the claim is true, then anyone, anywhere, can do this same experiment and get the same result. So whether you're in Japan or in India or in China or Germany and you take 2 rats, a cage, and some zombie viruses, and you do the same experiment, you'll see the same thing happen. There's no interpreting of photographs or figuring out if someone is lying or biased. If it's true, it just works. And that's why science relies on experimentation as much as possible to investigate how the world works.
Okay, we've analyzed the source, meaning who is giving us the information. We've analyzed the information, meaning what are they saying, what's the evidence. And before we do our final step, we're going to take a little break.
Welcome back to Is It Sasquatch? The game show that requires a little bit of critical thinking, and by that I mean the bare minimum. Let's meet our contestants. Darius, originally from London, now runs a small business in Pacoima.
Hello.
Lou from Brooklyn.
How you doing?
Lives at home with his mom.
Hey, saves me money.
Cheryl is from Topeka.
Hello.
Works in healthcare and is an Irish robot.
I'm very excited to be
Fantastic. First question. Your best friend was hiking last week and says she saw a Sasquatch.
What's a
She's got
Sasquatch?
Really?
It's a large, hairy mountain man with big feet.
It's a Bigfoot.
Oh.
Okay, she's got no other evidence. How strong is this evidence? Lou.
Well, she saw it, so very strong.
No, Darius.
All my friends tell the truth, so very strong.
No, Cheryl.
Weak.
Correct. Why?
Because it's anecdotal evidence, and even my best friend could be mistaken.
Correct again. Double points.
She said she saw it. That's right.
Next question. Now, your friend has some hair that she got from the same place. What type of evidence is this? Lou.
All the evidence I need.
Nope. Darius.
Hairy evidence.
Nice try. Cheryl.
Physical evidence.
Correct.
I knew that.
And is this physical evidence strong enough to prove that the Sasquatch exists?
Yeah.
Wrong.
Absolutely.
Wrong.
No.
Correct.
Oh, come on.
What do you mean? It's physical hair.
We don't know what kind of hair it is.
Correct.
But your best friend said it was Sasquatch hair. I mean,
Well, if it's not Sasquatch, then what could it be?
A bear?
Excellent. Next question. What kind of evidence would be stronger than one strand of hair? Darius.
More Sasquatch stories?
Lou.
more hair.
What? Cheryl.
Maybe an experiment to test whether the DNA of the hair matches known animals?
What? That's right, some sort of experimental evidence.
What? This is ridiculous.
Congratulations, you make it to the final round, Cheryl.
Where did that come from?
The last question, the final question, is one question.
I'm ready.
Based on this evidence, is it Sasquatch?
Probably not.
Oh, come on.
Oh, well done. Well done.
This game show's not really that fun.
You know, my best friend said never trust a robot.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Missing the point.
Okay, we've analyzed the source. Who's telling you? We've analyzed the information. What are they telling you? Now?
Step 3. Triangulate.
Triangulate. What does that mean?
It's got something to do with triangles.
Kind of. It has to do with the number 3.
If you remember back in episode 4, we talked about cell phone towers that relay our cell phone messages back to a central hub. Well, cellular service providers can actually locate a cell phone based on the signals received by these towers.
So, if you want to find out the true location of a cell phone, you can actually do it using cell phone tower information. But you can't just use one cell phone tower. You have to triangulate, which means using at least 3 cell phone towers. Analyzing a cell phone signal can tell you how far away that phone is from a cell tower. One cell tower gives you many possible places.
Now let's say there's another cell tower, which determines the signal is coming from a different distance away. Where these two distances meet up is still a pretty big area.
By adding information from a third tower, we can see where all of those points intersect. This will narrow things down a lot, and we should be able to figure out the true location of the cell phone. This is called triangulation, and it's a concept that's also applied to information.
When you see a story that looks real and has nudged your probability meter into the probably true zone, the next step is to use triangulation to look for other independent sources that make the same claim. So, if there's a news report,
health officials think they've identified the source of the infection, 25-year-old Kevin Sharp, who died last month.
If other independent news sources are reporting the same information,
Doctors at the CDC believe that the 25-year-old hiker is the source of the
According
infection.
to officials at the CDC, Kevin Sharp, a 25-year-old
then the probability of it being true goes up. The trick is to make sure that the other sources are actually independent, meaning they aren't just quoting each other, but have verified their information on their own.
Is there a major epidemic sweeping?
If 3 news articles come from the same online magazine, those are not independent sources.
When things like disasters happen, there are always many sources of information. There are news feeds pushing articles from all different news sources.
How do we know the zombies aren't on this ship?
And of course, there are many random people who take to YouTube or blogs with all kinds of theories about what is going on. By using these 3 steps, you can reduce your chance of getting tricked by misinformation.
All right, we're about to wrap up part 1. In part 2, we're going to take our probability meter and our truth-finding steps and show you how to apply them to a crazy-sounding real-world example.
There have been similar type of flying humanoids seen by hundreds, if not thousands of people.
But before we do that, it's time to check in with the kids, who have been waiting not so patiently in quarantine.
Beep, beep, beep.
How long has it been?
5 hours and 17 minutes. 18 minutes.
Good news.
Mom, you're here!
Oh my God!
Elliot!
All right!
Nadine!
Hi, Mr. Walker. Hi, Mrs.
Come
Walker.
back, both of you give me a hug. Oh, whoa, what happened to your leg? Your mother and I got in a car accident.
We did.
Yeah.
So did we. Elliot was driving. Elliot!
About that, Dad, I kind of drove the car through the garage door, and then I crashed it.
What? That's awesome!
What? You're not mad?
No, you're here, Nadine's here. I don't care about anything else.
Dad, we saw a VW van just like the one you bought.
It was really weird. It's the same color, make, model, everything. It even smelled weird.
Oh my God, it was big old fluffy?
I think it was.
That's what we said.
Hey, where's my dad? Have you guys seen him?
Oh, Nadine, honey, they're still looking for your dad.
Oh. Okay.
Hey, listen. There are so many other military bases around. I mean, I bet he's probably at Pendleton.
That's right.
Yeah.
Honey, I'm sure he's fine. I know he is, and I promise we will find him no matter what, okay?
Okay.
If you want to find out the truth about Nadine's dad, you're going to have to listen to part 2. I'm just saying.
Step 1, check the who's the origination. 2, check the what's the information. Step 3, check who else, triangulation. Then reassess probability. Is it more or less? Who else? Step 1, check the who's the origination. 2, check the what's the information. Step 3, check who else, do triangulation. Then reassess probability. Is it more or less?
Okay, in part 1, we came up with a process to figure out what's true and what's not. And just to recap, first we have to bust out our
mental truth probability meter.
Because you want to see things in terms of probabilities, like scientists do. When new information hits your brain, you're ready to move your probability meter between probably true and probably not true. And to help you figure out which way your probability meter should move, you go through 3 simple steps.
Step 1, analyze the source.
Step 2, analyze the information.
And finally, step 3, triangulate. In part 2, we're going to show you how these steps can be applied to the real world.
Part 2. Using the 3 steps to figuring out the truth about things in the real world.
We're going to start
like
off
when your sister tells you to go onto the internet and check out a news article about alien conspiracies.
We get
and
it.
you have to tell her she should stop sending you
Yes,
that
yeah,
stuff. It's ruining all the family get-togethers.
Okay, thanks for that. We're going to show you how these steps can be applied to the real world.
We humans are naturally curious, which is why we need to check out that dark cave. Or why we stay up late finishing the book that we love. Or why we panic just a little bit when someone we like
Why are you not responding?
doesn't return our text messages. And that's because, as we said in part 1, your brain really doesn't like unknowns.
I really don't. I hate them.
So much so that our brains would rather make stuff up instead of just letting an unknown sit there, being an unknown.
Can't let it sit there.
It's just annoying.
Let's just make it up.
We need to know.
What is it?
Take Nadine's dad, Miles, for example. What the heck happened to him? If we finished the show without telling you what happened, you'd probably be annoyed because you're missing the end of the story. You see how annoying that is? You didn't know what happened. It's an unknown. And for some of you started making stuff up, right? Maybe there's a problem with the download. Maybe my phone ran out of juice. Or maybe there's an actual mistake in the show.
When we don't have any information to finish even a sentence, our brains try to fill in the gaps. Nadine is doing the exact same thing at this point. She feels like she's running out of options. She's finally got a hold of Pendleton Air Force Base using a secure phone.
RESCOTT.
But they were unable to give her any information about her dad. So she started to come up with theories.
Maybe he's alive, but he just can't get to the phone right now for some reason. Or he was bitten by Zinsky.
Or he's still out there.
Maybe he's injured.
Or maybe he never loved me in the first place and used this as an excuse to leave town. Never loved me. He's fine.
I don't think he's alive.
He's totally fine.
He's a Zinsky. I know he's a Zinsky.
Now, if Nadine had a probability meter, it would be all over the place. When she's afraid, the worst outcome seems the most probable.
He's a Zinsky.
When she's feeling hopeful, the best outcome seems probable.
He's totally fine.
But without any more information, she feels pretty lost.
Like Nadine, we struggle with unknowns and often fill in the gaps based on what feels correct instead of what's most probable. So, what do we do in the real world when we see or hear something that we can't explain? Like, I don't know, a flying humanoid creature? Well, we're about to find out.
Flying humanoids.
If you go on the internet and search flying humanoid Chicago, you get a whole bunch of information that looks like it could be true. And on YouTube, you get the same thing. And to be clear, this is not part of our Nox zombie fictional story. We're being serious. This is something on the internet right now.
Let's switch on that probability meter. And for the sake of the show, we're going to start that meter in the middle, meaning that we're going to assume that the story's probability of being true is about the same as it being false.
All right, cool. Here's the story. In the past couple of years, over 50 people have reported that they saw a large human-sized creature with wings either flying around the city or perched in high places. Sometimes it hovers, sometimes it lands on a car, basically it just scares people. Okay. This sounds a little crazy, but
there are articles, websites, even a Google map showing locations of where these sightings happen.
Huh.
Let's ask the big question from part 1. Why should I believe that?
Well, at first glance, you might think, oh yeah, that's probable, because there's more than 50 eyewitnesses, including a cop and a friend of a newspaper reporter. Okay. And the detailed map shows some clustering in certain areas. Yeah. Also, legit newspapers like the Chicago Reader and the Chicago Tribune have written articles about these sightings.
Now, some people would hear all that and think, sounds good.
Can't wait to tell Gerald.
Tell me what?
There's a mysterious flying humanoid.
Oh, no.
Who's flying around Chicago.
Bye,
scaring
Brian.
people, man.
But we can do better than that.
No, it's true.
We've asked Ben Radford to come back and help us apply the 3 steps we talked about in part 1. Remember? Ben spent years scientifically investigating strange claims like this. Where do we begin?
Step 1. Analyze the source.
Who is telling us about seeing huge bat-like creatures? There's a website which has collected all of the eyewitness accounts. These are the stories from people who said they saw something.
And these only exist in text form, so we're getting a computer to read it aloud.
Had humanoid features such as pronounced arms
Like those of a huge eagle, but more
The body was dark and smooth in
It
texture.
looked like it had bat wings.
It looked like it was trying to get into the car.
One thing you look at, of course, in examining these sightings is who are making these reports. In most cases, they're anonymous.
Anonymous is when the name of the person is not identified, so we don't know who they are.
This is a problem, because if we don't know who they are, we can't verify anything about them. Are they honest?
Yes.
No, we have no idea. One guy says he's a cop. He could be, but he could just as well be some dude saying he's a cop. In fact, everybody could be making it up.
Are they unbiased?
Again, don't know because we don't know who they are.
And lastly, are the sources experts? This is an easy no. None of the anonymous eyewitnesses describe themselves as experts. But wait, you say.
Who would be an expert in flying mystery creatures?
Well, a good place to start would be an expert in flying non-mystery creatures like, I don't know, an ornithologist.
a biologist that studies birds.
Or a batologist, a biologist that studies flying mammals called bats.
That's not real, right?
My name's Dr. Tyrone Lavery, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher. I focus on mammals in the area around Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Australia.
Okay, so there's no such thing as a batologist, but we did find a mammologist.
And I mostly focus in bats and rats.
We even found a mammologist who looks for rare species of rats and bats.
They say that I'm chasing ghosts, really.
Okay, let's see how good an expert he is. Let's go back to the questions that Ben asked in part 1.
Do they have a PhD?
Yes, he's got a PhD in ecology from the University of Queensland in Australia.
Are they recognized in the field?
Yep, he currently works at the University of Kansas, and he's a scientific affiliate with the Field Museum in Chicago, both respected institutions.
Have they passed exams?
I think we covered that with the PhD.
He's worked in this field for over 7 years, and he spent so much time looking for a rare species of bat on the island of Vandenberg that the locals have given him a nickname.
Oh, they call me Tagi. T-A-G-I. That's the name for the monkey-faced bat.
So, in addition to being well-educated and employed by respected institutions, Dr. Tyrone Lavery is nicknamed after an actual bat. If you're looking for an expert opinion on large flying bat creatures, Dr. Lavery is probably a good place to start.
And have any experts like Dr. Lavery chimed in on the flying humanoid debate? Sadly, no.
So not only are there no expert witnesses, the expert that we did find to ask about flying humanoids thought it was a joke.
And then one more thing about these sources. These eyewitnesses aren't telling us their stories directly. We're reading them on a website that has gathered the stories together.
What you find is that in many of these cases, the people that are collecting these reports and promoting them, they have an agenda.
Meaning they have a bias.
And so if you already believe that there's a mysterious flying creature in the skies over Chicago, then you're going to pick and choose anything that's considered weird and lump that into evidence for the flying creature that you're sure exists.
So someone who already believes in flying humanoids is more likely to believe someone saw a flying humanoid instead of something else. They're biased toward believing in flying humanoids. So is the source biased? Well, for the eyewitnesses, we don't know. And for the website people, probably yes.
So after analysing the sources, we find that they are pretty far from an honest, unbiased expert. In fact, they seem to be a lot closer to unknown, potentially biased non-experts.
So not very credible sources pushes our probability meter down towards less likely.
Before we get to step 2, let's check back in with Nadine. What kind of sources has she been dealing with? Are the people at the Air Force Base honest and unbiased? It seems like it. They want to help her find her dad, and they don't really have any reason to lie. But they can't do very much. She needs a better source.
I know there are thousands of people who are lost, but you have to have some sort of registry, right? The name is Miles Prescott. Can you please check again?
Excuse me, miss?
I'm on the phone.
Did you say Miles Prescott?
Yeah?
You must be Nadine.
How do you know that?
My name is Ed McIntyre. I work with Miles in finance.
I'll call you back. Do you know what happened to him? Last we heard he was at work.
The police took him.
What? Why?
I don't know. Miles was leaving work early, I think to get you. There was a commotion because he hit Jerry.
What?
Yeah, there was a lot of blood. And Jerry looked sick.
What? Do you know where they took him?
No, not really.
You're here. Why isn't he here? You said there was blood.
Why
would they take him?
I don't know.
Why are you telling me this?
Nadine is frustrated because although Ed is a good source, he just doesn't have enough information for her to get to the truth. What Nadine needs is evidence. And what about our flying humanoids? Is there any evidence that there are flying bat creatures in Chicago? Let's find out.
Step 2. Analyze the information.
In step 1, we concluded that our flying humanoid sources consisted of a lot of unknown, potentially biased non-experts. So what about evidence?
First, we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, which is pretty weak, but we have more than 50 people with anecdotal evidence about seeing something. How would Tyrone tackle this?
The way that I would start would be by interviewing each of these people that's reported seeing a flying humanoid. I would ask them a lot of questions about what it looked like, what time of day they saw it, where they saw it, and then I'd start by looking for patterns in those answers that people gave me.
But this is tricky, because if you're not careful, you could be the one creating a pattern just by how you ask questions.
Well, my main approach is to not give the information that I'm looking for.
So for example, another species of mammal that Tyrone's been looking for is a large tree-dwelling rat that people say they've seen, but no one's actually caught or photographed.
You know, if you say, is the rat black, then people might immediately agree with you rather than thinking of the color themselves.
And then you've actually introduced a bias, because now your eyewitnesses are biased towards thinking black, when maybe they would have said dark brown had you just asked,
what color is the rat?
And you have to make sure bias doesn't creep into other questions. So you have to ask things like,
how does it live? What does it eat? Rather than, does it live up in the trees? Does it eat coconuts?
So if you're talking to witnesses in Chicago and you want to get unbiased answers about flying humanoids, you wouldn't mention flying humanoids. Instead, you would ask, what did you see? How big was it? Now it means something if you find a pattern.
If I interviewed 50 people and they gave me 50 different answers for how this thing looked, then I would be pretty uncertain that it existed. But if I interviewed 50 people and say 40 of them gave me an answer that was very similar, there might be actually something to this story.
So let's use Tyrone's technique and see if these eyewitnesses show a pattern. Let's go out and interview them. Oh wait, we can't. We don't know who they are. So another bad thing about our sources being anonymous is that we can't actually follow up and ask them questions about what they saw.
So all we have to go on are these anonymous reports. And according to Ben Radford, they're not very consistent.
You have some people saying it was like a large bat or an owl.
This object looked like a large black bat.
Others described it differently.
The wings were rounded like that of an insect with no sharp edges.
A lot of people say it was a tall 6 or 7 foot man that had like wings on the back.
The wings looked like those of a huge eagle, but more triangular in form.
So when you look more closely at the weird flying animal sightings, you find that they're not talking about one specific thing. They're actually talking about a variety of things.
So it's not even clear that all this anecdotal evidence is describing the same thing. That's something we're assuming because someone else grouped all of these descriptions together.
But wait, you say.
There's like so many eyewitnesses, man. Doesn't that mean anything? It's gotta mean something.
Well, this depends. How many people live in the area where these sightings occurred?
If there's particular areas where there's not that many people living but they're seeing it a lot, I would think that that's got more chance of finding it in that area than an area of big population where it's not seen very often.
So since Chicago is a city of 2.7 million people, and it's only been seen 50 times...
With so few sightings in such a big city, that would decrease my belief in it.
Okay, let's move on from anecdotal evidence.
What about physical evidence?
As far as we can tell, just looking for flying humanoids in Chicago, there's no video footage and 2 or 3 blurry photos that exist, one of which was uploaded to the internet in 2011. So, the first thing to ask is, of course, are these photos real? There's a whole branch of science dedicated to solving crimes called forensics that also deals with spotting the tricks that people use to fake things, like photographs. Now, the bad news is that most people are not forensic investigators.
No!
The good news is that you can find tools on the internet to help you.
Photoforensics is a digital image analysis site.
That's Neil Krawitz, and his site, which he said really fast, is called Photo Forensics with an F, F-O-T-O forensics.com.
So you can upload a picture and go through a couple of tools that will help you tell if the picture's been digitally altered or if it's camera original or if it was modified, how or where was it modified.
Neil's a hacker and a computer scientist.
Oh, wow.
On his website, you can upload a photograph and use his software to determine if it's been messed with or not.
Neil's software allows you to look for clues in the digital information that make up an image file. If you know what you're looking for, you can find out all kinds of things you can't otherwise see.
Like metadata.
Metadata.
Metadata is data about data. So it's information like the type of camera that was used, the camera settings that were used, the date and time the picture was taken. If there's GPS information, which there usually isn't, but if there is, then it's the type of GPS information, so you know the latitude, longitude, possibly the altitude or the direction they were facing.
So if someone shows you a picture of an ancient Roman mummy, but the metadata shows that it was taken in New Jersey, this physical evidence is probably fake.
Talking about, you saying there's no Romans in New Jersey?
And your probability meter would go down. Neil's software also analyzes the image itself.
One of the algorithms that I have is something called error level analysis.
Error level analysis looks at what's happening with the pixels that make up the image.
And it takes a look at the amount of error that is introduced when you save the picture. So it basically draws it as a map over the picture. So you can see this area changed a lot and that area changed very little.
Basically, if you mess with one part of a picture and not the other, say you're replacing someone's face, the manipulated area will show up differently than the rest of the photo. You can't see what was done, but you can see that something was done.
And there are a whole bunch of other super secret tools that Neil couldn't tell us about.
Most of the pictures that I work on for clients, I'm not allowed to talk about.
Oh, wow.
Okay, but what about flying humanoids? Well, there's one picture that's been mentioned a lot, which looks like it was taken with a camera out a car window. In the sky in the background, there's a really small brown thing that looks like it could be a flying human bat thing.
So what you want to do is find the original photo, or in this case, the very first version of the photo that was uploaded to the web, and do some analysis on it. Well, we did that. And then we sent it to Neil to get the full workup with all of his super secret forensic tools. And what did he find?
First off, it's a fake. But what is interesting is that Neil said it was a pretty good fake. In fact, he gave it an A-. Nothing in the metadata and error level analysis looked immediately suspect.
Whoever created it was trying to trick not only casual web surfers, but also forensic tools as well. Which means two things. One, watch out for fake pictures. And two, there are no real photos of flying bat humanoids in Chicago. Okay, so what about other physical evidence? Hair samples, blood samples, poop samples. Nothing. Well, sometimes you have to go to the anecdotal evidence to find more physical evidence.
If you say you saw a Bigfoot on a ridge, you can go to that ridge and look for hard evidence, right? You could maybe find a bone or a piece of hair or something.
You could also do what Tyrone did when he was looking for his rats and bats.
We used camera traps, which are automatic cameras you can leave in the forest for 3 months at a time, up to 6 months. And that whole time they're working by themselves automatically. If a rat walks in front of the camera, it will take a photo.
Yes, we know what you're thinking. I'm not gonna go set up some cameras out there for 3 months at a time in Chicago because somebody said there was a flying humanoid. Yes, that's true. But did anybody do that? Did anybody go and see if there was security camera footage that might have caught this flying humanoid? Did anyone go out to where these sightings happened and look for physical evidence like scratches on rooftops or feathers or anything else?
So we're gonna pan around and show you.
Turns out, yes.
Where this creature was spotted.
And did they find any physical evidence?
Showed up. Did you actually take a walk around the park?
We did.
And see if you could find any evidence of anything happening? I mean, it's been a week now, so things might have kind of washed away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
What exactly?
What could you even look for?
No. So basically, there's no physical evidence.
Lastly, experimental evidence. There's no physical evidence to do tests on, and we don't know much about flying humanoid behavior, so it'd be hard to set up an experiment. The only thing that we can do is test stuff that we do know about that could relate to flying humanoids.
So, for example, in the research that I did into giant mysterious birds in New Mexico, I consulted paleontologists and ornithologists to find out how big can they actually get. There are actual anatomical constraints on how big a bird can get, because if the wings are too big, they physically can't lift them.
Did anybody do any math to figure out whether the wings should be too big or whether the body's too heavy or whether anatomically it's even possible?
And all of this to say is that the experimental evidence, which is the strongest kind, isn't present in any of the news coverage.
So, our second step, analyze the information, the evidence. What do we have? Spotty anecdotal evidence, no good physical evidence, no experimental evidence.
Probability meter, even lower. And what about Nadine? What kind of evidence does she have about her dad? She has anecdotal evidence from Ed about her dad getting attacked by Jerry. But was Jerry Azinski? Was there any contact between him and her dad? What did Ed actually see? Is there any physical evidence?
Did you see him get attacked?
Yeah, but I don't know if he... I actually took some video.
Really?
Oh, but I lost my phone.
Great.
I mean, there was a lot of commotion. There was like a lot of guys rappelling down from the helicopter, and there was whoop, 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 and everything was like dust was flying everywhere, and you know.
Great.
Oh, you know what? I sent it to Susan. She's here too. She may have it. Susan! Susan!
Ed, why are you yelling?
This is Miles's daughter.
Who?
From finance.
Oh.
Hey, do you have that video, the one I sent you of the cops picking up Miles?
I think so. Let me check. Yeah, here it is.
Oh my god.
What is going on?
Oh my god.
Back away. What's wrong
Why aren't they helping him?
Did he touch you at all? I don't know what is going on.
Is that his blood?
I got that.
Oh my
out.
god.
We need you to come with us. I can't. My kid is waiting for me.
Sir, we're asking nicely. That's not going to last long.
That's it.
I knew it. He's infected.
Hey, you don't know that.
He's probably fine.
Yeah, that's what everyone keeps telling me.
So, Nadine finally has some physical evidence, and it doesn't look good. If Miles had a cut on his arm when he got close to Jerry, he may have been exposed to the Knox virus. The police took him in for quarantine, and that's all we know. So for Nadine, the probability that he's alive is getting lower.
And speaking of low probabilities, let's get back to our flying humanoids.
So far, we've come up with a whole lot of nothing. Unreliable sources reporting questionable evidence. Our probability meter is pretty low. So it's time for our last step.
Step 3. Triangulate.
Okay, let's triangulate. Who else has been reporting on the humanoids? Yes, there are articles in the Chicago Reader and Tribune, both legitimate papers, but what's the content? Mostly they are describing the eyewitness accounts. They are not actually investigating the claims, and all the articles they cite are by one guy who runs the website that has been collecting these claims.
There are no other independent verified sources reporting on seeing a flying humanoid. And in fact, the two sources we did look at, a guy who investigates the existence of mysterious creatures and a guy who investigates the existence of non-mysterious creatures, both sources, independent of each other, told us
there's really no good hard evidence of flying humanoids in the skies.
I would be surprised if there was a big human-sized animal that can fly that we haven't discovered yet.
Which leads our probability meter to fall into the highly, highly, highly unlikely zone. Which is great news because now you can confidently walk around Chicago at night not having to worry about flying birdmen.
Oh yeah? Ma, tell him what you saw last week.
It was flying bug man with huge eyes like in that movie.
How do you explain that?
And your response should be?
I can't. But that doesn't mean she can either. Show me the evidence that it was a flying humanoid, and I'll revise my truth probability.
Ma, she don't believe you.
When we encounter information, we need to switch on our probability meter and take our 3 steps. Analyze the source, analyze the information, and triangulate.
Step 1, check the who's the origination. 2, check the what's the information. Step 3, check who else, triangulation. Then reassess probability. Is it more or less?
This is a lot of work for your brain to do, and your brain is going to get tired. It's much easier to believe stuff you already think is true. It's much harder when all the evidence is pointing to one thing and you really want to believe another. Right now, Nadine is struggling because her probability meter isn't pointing in the direction she wants it to.
So, it's been 2 days since the kids arrived at the base. Nadine still hasn't heard anything from the other safe zones about her dad. And after talking to Ed and Susan, she's afraid the worst has happened.
So, Nadine, I was thinking.
Elliot, it's been 2 days.
But what if?
I would have found him by now.
Yeah.
I just don't even know what they're doing.
So what if?
The Red Cross in World War II
Nadine?
was more efficient than this, and their computers were terrible.
But
how hard is it to alphabetize
Nadine.
a list? I mean, come on.
Shut up. Here.
What is that?
It's a phone. You talk into it. Say hello.
Hello?
Nadine?
Dad!
How's the bravest kid I know?
Well, she's going crazy. She was in quarantine for 5 hours, then waiting around for 2 days for her dad to finally pick up the phone. Where are you?
I'm sorry. I'm at Camp Pendleton, about 250 miles south of you guys. Hey, the walkers told me a little bit about your adventure.
Uh-huh.
Not gonna fuss so much when I ask you to go camping next time, are you?
Dad, I am not going camping for a very, very long time.
You kids really did it.
I miss you, Dad.
Hey, me too, kiddo, me too. You stay safe, and I'll see you soon. And keep Owen and Elliot out of trouble, will you?
I'll try. I've got some very interesting stories to tell you.
Well, you can tell me in a few days.
I love you.
I love you too.
So, why is the truth important?
First of all, it's important because you don't want to get scammed out of your money buying flying humanoid insurance, or edible moon cheese, or magic crystals, or brain tonics. But it's also important if you are curious about how the world actually works.
What if you're not curious about how things work? You just want to sit on your couch?
Well, do you like driving in cars and surfing the internet?
Well, of course, everybody loves that, man.
Cars and computers only exist because of curiosity. In fact, all of the things we take for granted, vaccines, cell phone towers, clean water, safe food, and complex transportation networks, none of that would exist if scientists and engineers weren't trying to figure out the truth about how the world works.
It's important to know what's true about the world because that's how humanity progresses. That's how we build bridges and design buildings and make medical advances, is poking at the world and exploring and figuring out what's real and what's not real, what's truth and what's myth.
The human brain never stops being curious, and this curiosity led us to building all the things that make up the world we live in. We need to figure out how everything works because our brains hate unknowns.
The problem is our brains aren't perfect. And because of this, sometimes we think we're figuring stuff out when we're actually making stuff up.
And that's why humans developed science, as a way to keep our brains focused on the truth, regardless of what we want to be true. And you can think scientifically too, by taking out your probability meter and using the 3 steps. Now, before we go, let's deal with the last unknown of the story.
Dr. Mills, Karen Wyman, USA Today.
What happened to the Knox epidemic?
What's the current status of the epidemic at this point, as far as you understand it?
We do have scientists on the ground, accompanied by the National Guard. They're reporting that the outbreak is 80% contained. With the swift evacuation of the non-infected population, the infected individual's source of food and water was eliminated. As far as we understand it, they still rely on these basic necessities to survive, and without them, they're slowly dying off.
So you're saying people can go back to their homes? Is that what you're saying?
Unfortunately, not for a while. We are taking soil samples to determine how long...
So it all worked out in the end. The outbreak burned itself out, the Walkers came closer as a family, Nadine was reunited with her dad, and...
You're not serious.
What? Look at all this cool stuff you guys did.
You nearly got killed multiple times.
You're fine now.
Shabam is produced by CC Herbert. Your hosts are...
My dad, Mel Herbert.
My dad, Josh Kurz. And my mom, Wendy Rotoweiss. They also created the show.
You know what? You people are sick.
Come on, you drove your first car.
Yeah, right into a truck.
That's like a rite of passage.
Recording engineer and mix master is Bill Connor. Our voice actors are Steve Santucci, Rose Sangenberger, Chase Salinsky, Sean Paris, Jess Thinkpen, Andrew Gallant.
This was extremely dangerous.
But look at all the scientific reasoning and problem solving you guys did.
Problems that you created.
Summer Austin, my mom, Danielle Benjamin,
Ward Crockett, Tim Toohey, Art Kimbrough, Jason Major, Dave Mason, Jess Mason, and Sarah Birmingham.
You were so clever with the water heater and the Mylar. That was great.
That water heater water tasted like sulfur. Glad you had fun.
With a special thanks to Professor Ben Radford, Dr. Tyrone Lavery,
Neil Krawitz, Joanne Dubach, Tim Versteinen, Dr. Joyce Chaplin, and me, Grady Rotoweiss O'Brien. And me, Zachary Benjamin Kurz.
and me, Micah Herbert.
I would really like to have a word with all of your mothers.
Also featuring the musical stylings of Matt Eccles and St. Cecilia.
Shabam is a production of Fuliboo Incorporated. This episode of Shabam is sponsored in part by the making and science team of Google.
And why is that, Cece?
Because Google loves science.
Trauma. That's the word that I'm coming out with. Trauma.
Guys, I think you're not appreciating what a useful teaching tool you've been part of. Think about it. We go about our lives taking a lot of things for granted. Our brains, our immune systems, electricity, food, water, cell phones, and GPS. Then along comes a zombie apocalypse and messes all that up and forces us to examine all the things we rely on. This whole adventure has been one big teachable moment.
You know what? Next time you can take that teachable moment and shove it right up your...
Elliot!
Shabam, shabam.